Hi, welcome to the software testing series. Today we're going to be talking about how to improve your testing skills. We're not going to be talking about any coding or technical skills in this series today, but we are going to be talking about more soft or thinking skills that you can apply to software testing and how to approach learning, developing, and being a better tester. Testing is a skill that anyone can practice, just like cooking or programming. If you don't put in time to practice, you will not improve. So I'm going to go through a couple of tips in how to improve your testing skills. I'm going to be using this presentation slide as a backbone to my presentation today, so I'm sharing my desktop with you. I'll share a link to these slide notes in the video recording in the comments below, so you can always access these references later on. I'm going to go through, each slide is meant to be interactive, but I'm presenting this in a single only style. When you go into the link on the presentation, you'll be able to interact with some of these comments and add your own thoughts and whatnot add some thoughts. And so the next person who comes along and sees this slide deck after you will also be able to read your comments and thoughts that you've left behind. So I'll share the link to this presentation so you can interact. So my first point, why do we bother testing? Short answer, we test to get feedback. And I'm also going to reveal answers as I go along. And I've got a mobile app test strategy that I use in my workplace to help justify that reason of why we bother testing. Some people say, we test to try and find bugs to prove that the software works as expected, and these are all good enough answers, but I think they kind of get the point. We want to help answer the question, are we concerned with shipping this software to our customers? Are there any potential risks with getting this software out the door? Are there concerns? Is there anything we should take a step back and analyze a bit further? If you don't pay attention to the feedback you obtain while testing, then why did you bother testing in the first place? If you've got test cases that are constantly failing, why are they still kept around? If you're not paying attention to that feedback, maybe question why you're doing that testing in the first place. I'm also going to go through a couple of misconceptions as well. So if you're interacting with these slides later on, you can pull out a note and add some comments to that one as well. Or you can copy and paste a thumbs up or thumbs down if you agree with some of these sentiments or not. So the idea, QA is responsible for quality, true or false? You decide. In my opinion, quality is a team responsibility. It's not just up to one team or one person to be wholly responsible. As a software tester, I can't hardly build in quality, so how am I supposed to be the owner for it? I can't verify quality any more than the next scrub off the street. And at the end of the day, your customers are your true quality champions. They will actually be able to validate if your software is of a high standard or not. As testers, we can't verify quality. Sentiment. Testers break software. True or false? Have a think about this one. At the end of the day, all software was built broken. We didn't break the software ourselves, but we've just helped teams discover where that software is broken. So this is a doozy. Testers do manual testing. This is one of my biggest bugbears. I really dislike being called a manual software tester. One of my pet peeves is to say all the work I do is manual in nature. We don't say manual programming, and we don't have manual doctors or lawyers. So why do we have this term manual testing? It doesn't seem to be applied to any other discipline. Maybe it's used in cars. So you have a manual car and an automatic car. But that's more related to how the cars change gears. There aren't any other professions that use the term manual, I think, in their nature. Just to agree on that sentiment, we don't say manual programming. So just because we use tools and technologies to help us test and we're using a hands-on approach doesn't mean there's anything manual. Saying I'm a manual tester discredits all of the study and investment into my profession that I've done. It makes it sound like, well, anyone can do testing if it's just manual testing. And it's one of my bugbears. So let's get into some practicing of testing. I'm sure you've seen a username password field somewhere on the internet or in the mobile apps you've used before. A good thinking exercise is to go through the approach of how would you test one of these fields. Is it a first time login or a registration? Has the password been locked? There's a whole bunch of different scenarios that you can brainstorm, and I'm going to go through some techniques that can help you brainstorm more scenarios when it comes for testing. On a side note, it can be useful to, these are some resources that are really useful for expanding your testing expertise. On GitHub, there is a big list of naughty strings. These strings tend to cause issues in many different software modules. I just need to find the text. Big list of naughty strings. So a whole bunch of programming terms, nulls, undefined, true, false. I might zoom in a little bit. Oops, that's the wrong one. I'm just re-navigating to Windows. I've been using Mac all day, so it's a little bit hard for me to transition, but thank you for your patience. Numbers in different formats as well. And eventually you get into a whole bunch of more arbitrary strings that might cause issues in your programs or not. And a whole bunch of special characters. Eventually we get down to Unicode, some quirky Unicode, programming variables, bytecode, and a whole bunch of character sets as well. Yeah, we've got emojis, we've got right to left rendering, some corrupted strings, upside down text. So this is a GitHub repository of list of naughty strings that you can programmatically include into any input variable, but also you can just copy and paste strings from this GitHub repository. Another thing when we come back to that username and password field is how often we don't really question the validity of an email. So a.b@mail.com is a valid email, but the scope for a valid email is actually a lot greater than that. So there's this blog post, it's relatively old, published in 2007, about how someone thought they knew how to validate an email address until they actually read the spec. And you'll find out that they discovered that these emails here are actually valid emails according to the specification. And we wouldn't have thought previously that having an @ symbol in the first name part would have been valid, but here we go. If it's within quotation marks, it can be a completely valid email. So it might be worth questioning your assumptions about what makes a valid email. The thing is, a lot of the email providers won't let you create these emails. If you're trying to set up a Gmail, they won't allow for funky characters and whatnot. But if you have your own domain or hosting service, you can set up an email with the quirkiest behavior you want. So those are two little things that can help improve your testing when you're testing string fields and email validation too. Another sentiment I have is test cases is not equal to testing. This is a misnomer. I feel like there's not a lot of transparency in the testing process, and so when managers don't have a lot of process into what's happening with testing, they tend to equate test cases with testing. I've worked on projects before where it was test case management. Everyone was, their performance was based on how many test cases they executed per day, and it's a very demoralizing way of working. It doesn't help show the value of testing either, and it kind of just reduces our testing skills to numbers and checkboxes, and it's not a very fun or engaging way to test. Another tool that can really help expand your testing scenario brainstorming is using mind maps. So a mind map you start with your central idea in the page. I like to use pen and paper when I'm starting out with mind maps. You draw your central idea and then you branch off into other ideas that are related. So you might have a section on security testing or performance testing or functional testing. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can structure your mind maps, and there's tons of online resources as well for checking out other people's mind maps too. Here's a mind map that I used in a mobile team previously. I had previously printed and laminated this mind map, and I would bring it along to planning sessions to help me to remind myself to ask questions about, do we have to build in any automation testing for this new feature we're working on? What about security, user experience? Are there any other things we want to consider from a quality point of view before we even build this feature? And I found this to be very powerful for bringing forward a lot of those testing concerns earlier on in the process. Backwards and forwards compatibility can be a pretty big issue in the mobile app space as well. Another way to expand your testing ideas is to develop heuristics. Heuristics sounds like a complicated word, but it generally just means a rule of thumb. Now, heuristics can be fallible. They're not correct all the time. But for example, one of my heuristics is it's easy to find accessibility bugs. So if someone wanted me to generate a whole bunch of bugs, I could go through and find a whole bunch of accessibility bugs, which could be a risk of some description. But that's because I know they're easy to find. Developers tend to overlook this element of quality. But would anyone care if I raised those bugs? Who knows? But that's one of my rules of thumb. You can go through and create your own mnemonic. A mnemonic can be a heuristic to remind you of different elements of testing. And a mnemonic is just a word where the letters mean different things to remind you of different structures. I'm going to go through a couple of different heuristics here as well. So James Bach has this heuristic test strategy model. It's a PDF on his webpage, and you can have a read through of that. It's a fairly small PDF. It's about 5 pages long, and James Bach has some really useful insights and blogs on his website too about how to improve your testing skills too. But the one of his testing techniques for his heuristic goes into functional, user testing, risk testing, flow testing, and he's got some examples of how you can use this heuristic to generate more testing ideas as well. Another heuristic, which is a mnemonic, is COP FLUNG GUN. And so all of these letters mean different things, and they're meant to remind you of testing different scenarios. I'll zoom in a little bit here so you can see. So C for COP stands for communication. If you were applying this for mobile app testing, you might branch that off into voice messages, calls, or text messages. The O could stand for orientation in this situation, where you're doing things to the physical hardware, and P can stand for platform, Android versus iOS, jailbroken phones, and a bunch of that. So if you've got a mnemonic, you can apply that to different testing scenarios to generate a whole bunch of different testing ideas. And the GUN part stands for G stands for guidelines, U stands for updates, and N stands for notifications. There are tons of heuristics and mnemonics out there to help testers generate a whole bunch of different ideas. Okay, so we've gone through heuristics and mnemonics. It's an awfully hard word to spell, mnemonic. Nightmare headlines games is another activity you can run within your team to get the team to focus on brainstorming, testing ideas. I've run this exercise as a retro, and it's been quite fun to get the team involved with thinking about testing. So the premise behind this game is you set the scene. Worst case scenario, you open up the paper tomorrow and your software is on the front page. What is the nightmare headline? And so people will brainstorm all of the nightmare headlines that they could imagine happening with the software that they're working on. And then you brainstorm how your software could fail or contribute to that headline. I found this exercise is usually good for getting the team to focus on things like performance and security, which often get overlooked in your day-to-day cycle. And so out of this retro, you could have some outcomes or some objectives to try and do more performance or security testing or investigation, or maybe even just learning how to do some of those skills as well. Another approach to focus your testing efforts is a risk-based approach to testing. I think one of testers' superpower is being able to brainstorm all the possible different testing scenarios out there, but we never have enough time to do all the testing. When is enough testing enough? Well, how long is a piece of string? It really depends. But this risk-based approach can help you to focus on potentially more high-impact areas that your users would experience rather than investigating testing that might not be as valuable. So the premise being, you plot a little graph. On the x-axis, you put frequency of use. So items or features that are more frequently used go on the right-hand side, and on your y-axis, you put an impact if broken. Now, this is from a customer-centric point of view. You want to gauge how much the customer would care if a particular feature is broken. And then you can write down all of the flows of your app on sticky notes off to the side, and then drag and drop them across as you see fit. So say we had a mobile app and you have things like registration, transfer of money, view transactions, maybe send a contact us request, change PIN, and log in. Now, when I go through this exercise, I tend to place these items along this way. The login is the most important feature. It has the highest frequency of use and has the highest impact on the customer if it's broken. If someone can't log in and you're providing some sort of banking services, that's a really big impact. Whereas they might not send a contact us request, or there might be a way to find the contact us number for our website, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in our mobile app either. But this is also good for trying to develop a shared understanding around the different risks of your feature with your team, because your product manager might say that a particular feature actually has a higher impact, and your developer might not understand how big of an impact a particular feature is either. And I've used this board in a previous team, and whenever we had a new feature, whenever we had a new feature, we would go along and add it to this, and it was really good to get a reference point in contrast to other features we'd already built, how important this feature was, how much automation do we want to build. So you might want to build out a lot more automation or focus your testing efforts on the 3-star area, and you might do slightly less testing for the 1-star. But you can also bring in other elements of risk as well. You could do this process for things that might have a financial or legal or security risk as well. This is really just from a usability point of view, but you can try to get a risk-based assessment for your features in multiple different ways. And I like a more visual approach, because I find risk to be very nebulous and hard to understand, but people like pretty pictures and graphs. It does make it a lot easier to talk about our ideas. Another thing for generating a whole bunch of testing ideas is soap opera testing or scenario testing. The premise behind this idea is a way to get the business more involved with software testing. So you ask customer support or sales, hey, have you had any drama or customers who had a story that was just really dramatized and over the top, and what's the weirdest thing that our customers have complained about? So for example, someone might say, oh, we were building a airline booking system, and we had a father and son duo trying to go on the same flight. They had the same name, and they couldn't book 2 seats on the same flight under the same booking because our system didn't support that. It wasn't a scenario that our developers had considered when building out this platform. So you want to try and get people to brainstorm a whole bunch of wacky, dramatized scenarios, things like long-lost cousins coming from the grave, or family disputes, or whatnot, things that generate a lot of drama. And if you went through those scenarios trying to test your systems along that way with the business as well, you're more likely to find more bugs than if you just go through a simple test case of does password validate correctly. So it's just an idea to put out there. Wrapping up a little bit, when I think of testing, I like to think of the 5 C's of testing. These are all really important skills that testers can bring to the table. I think the number one skill that we tend to overlook is critical thinking. Hopefully this presentation has given you some ideas of how to practice some more critical thinking skills when it comes to software testing. Communication is really important. It doesn't matter if as a tester I discover 100 or 200 bugs. If I can't communicate those bugs effectively and the impact of those bugs to the wider team, then they're just going to be ignored. So being able to practice clear, concise communication is really important. Collaboration is key to software testers as well. We don't work in silos. Even if companies still have a siloed tester approach, we still have to collaborate with developers and product owners and the wider business context as well. I feel like I need to bring a lot of creativity to my role. Sometimes software testing doesn't flesh out my creative juices as much as I would like it to. So I always try to have a bit of fun. I don't know how many test systems out there that have Darth Vader and Harry Potter characters generating electricity bills and whatnot, because if I'm not having fun with testing, it's a lot harder for me to feel engaged and creative. And coding is one of those skills that testers can bring, but we don't have to have all the software development skills. Having some coding skills or understanding of how technology works, I think can really help expand the scope and your considerations when thinking about testing too. And it can just be from a scripting point of view, being able to investigate logs in a test environment. All of these things can really help in the debugging and trying to understand the problems in the software that we're working with. I put a challenge to you to try and put aside some time to practice testing. That's the whole idea behind bug bashes. Bug bashes are activities that I run in teams, maybe every 2 to 3 sprints. So maybe every month or two we'll come together, we'll put tools down and we'll try to focus on finding as many bugs as possible. I find it's a great social activity for trying to get the team to focus on practicing testing. And if you're running it in an office, you can bring some snacks, have some fun, maybe give out a trophy for your best bug hunter or whatnot. It's a really fun exercise to get people exploring features that maybe they haven't explored too much just yet as well. So my final sentiment is that testing is a skill that anyone can develop, and I'm going to go through a couple more points in how to go further from here. There are software testing books you can read. I personally struggle when it comes to reading books, but there are some well-renowned books and authors out there, so if it's your thing, Elizabeth Hendrickson, Cem Khanna, James Bach, Pradeep Sundararajan, and Jerry Weinberg are all prolific authors and have written a huge amount of content in this space and are definitely well regarded. You can sign up to a whole bunch of testing newsletters. There's a bunch that publish on a weekly basis. There's also software testing conferences, and many of the conferences put up their talks after production on YouTube. So you can have a Google around and find some talks that really interest you. There are a whole bunch of global testing communities you could consider joining. Ministry of Testing runs a global Slack group. So if you want to hang out with a bunch of testers in an online chat, that would be the community I recommend you reach out to. There's a similar thing that with the rapid software testing. If you do the course, they also have a Slack group of alumni from that course. Rapid software testing is a course run by Michael Bolton and James Bach, and it is a very good course for developing your software testing thinking skills even further. So, did you find this workshop useful? Leave some notes in the comments and I'll listen to your feedback later. Thank you.